My name's McCauley.
I'm Nyesha McCauley, and you're watching AccessTV.org. Today on Civic Beat, running for office can be kind of like preparing and running in a marathon, or like pregnancy and childbirth, and then delivery of a new life. Whatever metaphor you want to use to describe it, campaigning be hard. And, it just takes up a lot of space in your life. Now that we're on the other side of Hartford elections, I wanted to take a beat with Councilman Lebron and get his thoughts on his mayoral run and what's next for Hartford and what's next for him. Today's Tuesday, November 28th. I'm Nyesha McCauley, and welcome to Civic Beat. And welcome, Councilman Lebron. How are you?
Hello, Mrs. McCauley. How are you?
I'm good. Hanging in there.
Good.
Well, I wanted to have you on Civic Beat. Civic Beat covers just everything, sort of like how do we look at our civic life in Hartford? What are we doing around not just election time, but in between election time, and just talking through all the different things that are coming up. And I thought about you and that this was your first mayoral run, and wanting to really get a sense from you now that we are on the other side. Just your sense of like, how was that whole experience?
Well, I think, I haven't had the official debrief meeting yet that everyone has been asking about, but I think in general, it was an experience of a learning experience, I think first and foremost, in connecting with people. It got me back to what I really love, and that's out there talking to people, talking about their concerns, talking about what they would like to see. I think the second piece that was the most informative for me was the educational piece. How many conversations that I had informing or educating the general public about the elections. There's so much to it. And there's so much knowledge that is potentially out there. And I spent a lot of time, not only, in that educational piece, but also trying to bring people back to more civic engagement. I felt that was a constant theme. It was twofold. Not only, can you support me, which I think is the obvious, but I think the other piece is, can you get back into civics? Can you get back into being civically engaged? And those were the overall experiences that I felt.
So you mentioned not having that debrief meeting yet. So you're still in the space of just winding down, like you're still processing.
Yeah, I think the unfortunate thing that, I know this is personal to both you and I, and, my friend and colleague, Mr. McCauley, was the discrepancy in the election results. And so because of that, we're still in the midst of speaking to attorneys and just trying to decide what the next move is. It's likely that we're going to file an SEC complaint. I've had some attorneys reaching out to me to try to help me formulate that. I'm not an attorney myself, but what happened at the election with the supposedly clerical error that resulted in a margin error of 20%. So, you had about 1,000 votes that changed in an election where there were 5,000 votes cast for
Mm.
mayor. So you're talking about a 20% error rate, which is unusually high. And so we're still in the midst of dealing with that. And then once we put in that SEEC complaint, then I think we can sunset and then finally, be able to move on. So I think that that's what's holding things up.
Okay, okay. No, I definitely am quite familiar with that, and thank you for bringing that forward
Hmm.
for Hartford because it sort of went under the radar, if you will,
Hmm.
because the I would say somewhat of what you were describing about civic education, like having to be out there and talking to residents, not only campaigning for yourself, but sharing knowledge and information. I think there's a sense of disconnect with like the whole process, and so people
Hmm.
are not always aware of how all the inner workings go. But
Hmm.
that discrepancy that you're talking about is just one of another part of this whole process where you usually don't see, or you shouldn't see, I should say, in elections that much of a discrepancy from when the votes are counted, basically.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Ms. McCauley. You know, it's a very difficult piece, and I'm not minimizing the role of the registrar of voters. I think a couple things in regards to that is that number one, it is a job, and ultimately, it is an elected position, but ultimately, you have to execute on a job, and there should be deliverables on that job. I think going back to what I stated earlier in the civic engagement piece, the registrar of voters is elected on a very off year. So when you talk about voter apathy and voter turnout, low voter turnout, you're talking about the year where it is the least voter turnout. And one could argue that, the registrar of voters, aligned with the Secretary of State at the state level, is almost as equally important, or I would say secondarily important to the mayor, and that people have to have faith and trust and confidence in that position. And I'm not saying that there was any nefarious intent, but nonetheless, that margin of error rate is statistically significant. And it doesn't help with the public trust and the public confidence in our election process. And so that is the baseline of that. I think the other thing that was very disheartening, and this is a more personal element, but for folks to think that this isn't like that there isn't any human emotion or human attachment to these things, I think that they would be fibbing, for lack of a better word, if you will. And so, what happened at the election night, we had a watch party, and I had over 100 something people, and as a result of that mistake, it made it seem that we did much more. We didn't do as well as we thought we had done. And so what it created was two things that night. Like number one, I think on everybody's mind was the perception, right? Like the flashing chyrons or whatever fancy word that you use on television, didn't have me next to a Runin. And so, you went to the third or fourth page and there was just my name and not my face and, all of those other things. I think so that's one thing. But I think number two, within the people that were even watching the election results, and then people on my team were like, this can't be right because at the very minimum, we knew what the baseline was
Mm-hmm.
going in. And so it just created more angst in folks and more of a disbelief as to what's going on. And I'm thinking about this right now, and the folks that lived outside of Hartford, of course, these campaigns bring friends and families from outside of the city.
Mm-hmm.
I just remember now that I'm thinking about it, I'm reflecting like this would never happen in our town. This would never happen in this town. And
Right.
it's unfortunate because that thought process about Hartford, and what happened with the results is kind of on brand, if you will, with people's perception about how Hartford operates.
I certainly hear that sentiment, and on multiple fronts of
Mhm.
like what it personally what it does, which is why I sort of I was trying to find a appropriate metaphor to liken it to bring people into that experience of really when you're campaigning, you're the candidate certainly is putting their all into it, but you have a team, you have a base of
Right.
supporters, of family, friends, um, and that is a broad base support across the city. And when something like what we experience in Hartford with the discrepancy in the votes, it does a lot to the psyche. You know, your mind. It plays on your mind as well, and your heart and your spirit. And so it's definitely something I think Hartford, we as Hartford citizens, you know, we're going to have to continue this on well after um, today, you know, well after, you know, even your complaint is filed, what, you know, like well after into 2024, we really do have to continue to probe this and uncover it, and because it impacts has a long reach into further elections and how people want to participate in this thing
Right.
called
Right.
democracy.
Right, right. No, it does. And, if folks know me, I'm, some people call me a street fighter, or, whatever language, if you will, that people use. I am going to always swing. And it's not really, the election is done, and I'm not debating the results. What is called to question is the process, and the integrity and the fidelity of that process. And so, it isn't bitter. It isn't with, kind of bitter emotion. It's just the importance of having results that people can trust. And this isn't a new issue. As I've been covering the history and looking back, this has happened in Hartford more than one other time.
Mm,
And we have to do better. Long story short, we have to do better.
right.
And if I'm able to file an FCC complaint, and hopefully that'll pick up some traction, then Hartford and the Registrar of Voters can get the support that all of us in the city rightfully deserve.
That's right. That's right on. So, Councilman Lebron, you have taken this run for mayor, and at that, the transition into or out of your council position seat. So, I just wanted to take another beat and have
Sure.
you reflect on your term, you know, like this election closes some loops for you as well in that regard, that this is at the end of this year is also marks the end of that term as a
Right.
city council person. So just talk to us a little bit about your time on council. Like how would you sort of like, you know, and this is probably another one of those moments where you I haven't done the
Have had.
debrief, I haven't talked, you know.
Well,
um,
I tell you what, Mrs. McCauley, the the biggest thing with my time on council, and as I reflect back, is the pandemic. And look, it was stressful for me. There was a lot going on. I when I think about it, I think about this emotion I can't really describe, but I'm sure it's something, and everyone had their own feelings about what the pandemic did to them. But for me, in hindsight and reflecting, I was the chair of Health and Human Services,
mm,
and I barely got my. I'm not sure if my voicemail was even set up before my city hall voicemail was set up before we got shut down. And as the chair of Health and Human Services, I was intimately involved in the decision-making process. And I was blessed to be in that position. And I think also one where I was learning. And so it made me ask a lot of questions and push back on a lot of things. What happens with systems very often is that people get accustomed to systems and they kind of go through business as usual. But the pandemic brought something that no one experienced. And so I think my ability to be so close and as the chair of Health and Human Services and the ability to question a lot
Mm.
and push back on a lot of things, and just made sure that I understood them to the degree that I can understand, this disease without being a microbiologist, was something that I had to hit the ground running. But I think we did a good job, as I reflect back. I think with the pandemic, we were the first. I mean, Hartford was the first in a lot of areas. We were the first to, do the COVID testing and have the testing sites. And then, we were the first to have vaccines. And then we were the first to have at-home testing. And then we were the first to do at-home attestation. I wrote a resolution to allow employees to, take a COVID test and show it to the HR so that way they wouldn't be fired.
Mm.
So there were a lot of firsts, and then within that, um, we created a program to allow those families that were frontline folks who had to go to work and their kids weren't old enough to kind of stay home by themselves, but all the daycares were closed. We created these learning hubs where uh, kids, these young scholars would be able to come into a safe environment, log on, get food, some downtime, have some adult support while they were there. And so we created that. And so, there were a lot of things that we were on the cusp of, and it's really a microcosm of the resilience that Hartford always has to show, and we as a
Mm.
community always have to show. So, you know, I think that that's the number one thing that I will reflect on. But the other thing too, in terms of silver linings, we always look for the silver linings. Is I wrote a resolution creating the Heart Team, and so for folks that don't know, the Heart Team is a differential response to 911. And so
Mm-hmm.
what was happening during the pandemic is the police were responding to everyone, everything, everyone, and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And myself and at the time my staff, we believed like, that's not the appropriate response. And so what we did was we dove deep onto, creating what would a 911 phone call look like if it didn't need a police response. And that began the journey until what we call the Heart Team now, that is currently in use now in the city of Hartford. And I believe last year we diverted 2,000 police response calls to the more appropriate response. And so, those were the things that kind of came out of it. And though that will outlive the pandemic, and it's very progressive. And there's towns, excuse me, all over Connecticut, and there's folks across the country that are inquiring about this and how we're doing it. And so my hopes and prayers is that we'll continue that trend, because as we know with police responses, you oftentimes get a high disproportionate minority contact and minority engagement with police that often don't lead to positive results on either side, for the police and for the community.
Right, right, right. Really major policy initiatives that you are describing. Certainly, the pandemic brought forward. It just opened up new ways of thinking and portals that all of us still will have to walk through. But yeah, I think the Heart Team also is a great reflection of the kind of new thinking that emerged with the pandemic. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, like it just, there are certain uh, impacts to the way police respond. So, yeah, I think I would love to hear more as you walk through the process of reflecting, because I think as you're describing your time on city council, it's almost like, I'm thinking, I don't know if you're a Marvel fan with the Avengers, but, there was a blip and Thanos was able to snap his fingers and
Yes.
like wipe
Yes.
out like
Yes.
half of the planet. And I think the
Right.
pandemic is kind of like that moment where we still are going to have to walk through and think through how really all of these things impacted us, certainly here in the city of Hartford.
Yeah, I think they'll be studying this time frame, those 2 years. I call it
Hmm.
2 years, I think, from, the time we shut down to, I don't even know when the official date of the
Mm.
sunset is, but I feel like it's 2 years. I think we'll be studying, this for decades to come.
Hmm. So, you have a month or so left on
Hmm.
city council. Like walking through that, thinking about your time on city council, what's left, I guess, for you to accomplish?
Yeah,
I know you introduced a resolution, and I meant to check it out last night, but I totally, it
yeah.
slipped my mind. How did that go? Tell us about
Yeah, I mean,
the resolution.
so I introduced a resolution last night, particularly focused on that bridge that we see on 91 that is an attempt to connect the city to the riverfront. And when you look downtown, there is a much more um, uh, easier to look at connection between downtown and the riverfront. But in the north end of Hartford, we have this what really looks like a kind of like a jail walk. And, I don't know what else to describe it. And so it was something that I was working on for months and trying to get the language down. So my hopes are is that we could put that on the forefront because it's a visual reminder, um, obviously for the folks that live in the city of Hartford, but also everyone who passes by Hartford on 91 has to look at this catwalk. And for folks that may be listening that don't know what I'm talking about, it's that bridge over 91. It's a catwalk. It's fenced in, and they have the fences in a certain way where folks can't climb it. And I don't recall the last time I saw somebody walking on that thing. And so to at least start the conversation and at least put it on the forefront of people's minds, in terms of like, hey, look, you know, um, we need to be able to connect to our riverfront better. We have this thing called the Interstate Highway 91 that did tremendous damage of disconnecting our community from our riverfront. We see cities across the country thriving with their riverfronts, and here we were disconnected for 91. And so as a result, the remnants of that is this catwalk that I don't even know if it's called the bridge. I don't know what they're trying to call it. And so the point is, I have some recommendations there with a community member who brought it to the forefront. He's been trying to fight for this for well over 10 years.
Hmm.
And I'm introducing that it be named for veterans. I think we have to attach it to something where it can generate public interest. And I think what has happened, or what can happen, or what my hopes are, is that if you try to rename something, then everybody all of a sudden tries to, like, hey, hold up, everyone hopes to pay attention. So I'm trying to rename it after veterans. And so my hopes are it creates the awareness that we need, and that regardless of whatever we'll end up doing, at least we can understand that every day as people commute, that's what folks are seeing. And that just adds to the perception, and oftentimes negative perception that people from outside our communities have of Hartford, because that's what they see.
Hmm. Yeah, so something to keep an eye on, but also another area to keep an eye on in just the remaining few minutes that we have here is you. So,
Yes.
let's talk quickly about what's next, Nick. Where are we going?
Yeah, I mean, right now, I'm not particularly sure. I was all in. For folks that play poker or what have you, I put my chips all in the middle. I'm not able to run for council or stay on council, and I put all my collective chips into this mayoral basket. And folks, I'm always planning, but I really didn't have another plan. I didn't have a plan B because for me to do something of this grand nature, you had to put all your chips in. So I think right now I just reflecting on the experience, but also connecting with family and grounding myself in the work. I still have a day job that is connected to the Hartford communities, and focusing on that and kind of recentering myself. Nyesha, I've dedicated 30 years of my life. I've been involved in the Hartford community for well over 30 years. And so, I think it's okay if I was to take some time off and kind of, just focus on work and focus on family.
I hear that. And with that, I am going to extend an invitation for you to come back because
Sure,
I think we only scratched the surface of what's
sure.
there. And
Yes.
yeah, I wish you that time and space to debrief and grounding
Mm.
and enjoying your holidays too. So,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. You as well. You as well.
All right, Councilman, we will have you
Thank
back
you.
here on Civic Beat. Thank you so much.
Peace and love. Peace and love.
All right. All right,
Okay.
Hartford, you have just saw this conversation between myself and Councilman Nick Lebron right here on Civic Beat on accesstv.org. Please share, comment, like, subscribe, and send me your civic ideas. Looking forward to having more and more conversations in 2024. So stay tuned and keep watching. Keep it locked. accesstv.org.
Let me know.